Eric,
Omar.
I was told off air not to do this.
Well, anything that you're told to do off air doesn't count because the only thing that's real is what people see on the internet.
I thought, Eric, you're going to say, I know you, Omar, you're a contrarian. So if I told you not to do it, just in sheer rebellion, you're going to end up doing it, thereby doing what I wanted you to do in the first place. And that is, we are really breaking ground here because we have a lot to cover today. I was reflecting, Eric. I was reflecting. And I thought was it our last episode now, or would it be the episode before we were overviewing? So we were reviewing your review of an article talking about how to best essentially reach individuals, change the hearts and minds, the souls of people. And
that was last episode.
Last episode, yeah. And the intent always, genuinely with Iron Culture, is to be open, inclusive. The tagline underneath, from the inception, we decide on together for all lifters, and we strongly believe that. In fact, Eric, I'm not gonna.
However,
just tease them.
a close second.
Oh no,
exploring
I know what he's gonna
the
do.
meaning of lift. That was
Eric,
the close second.
That's the Helms bingo right there. That's on it. That's on it. It's like the Eric a catch phrase. Plus, also stuck together. So. Okay. I gotta be sincere here, though, because we try, and sometimes maybe we don't get it right, or I'll say I don't get it right, because I did see a review that I wanted to address, and someone said it's a 3 out of 5 star review, and someone said love the science, but so it's 3 out of 5, so it's 60%. All right, it's a C. Love the science, but not the snark. I think the guest in Helms did a good job discussing data and findings in a clear way, but after recently listening to the Turkesterone episode, I was really turned off by the host's snarky side commentary. I assume, of course, they meant myself. It very much distracted from the discussion. And I do want to apologize, because when we are communicating, when we're attempting to cover some of these topics, and it's just like YouTube videos, Eric, where let's say 50% of the audience could be your subscribers, 50% could be people just tuning in, because guess what? We chart on that there, iTunes were ranked. I'm not trying to be, facetious with anything that I say, so I'm not trying to, there's a serious topic to be covered, and then I'm being, completely obtuse to what we're covering. I think I know what they're referring to specifically with Turkesterone, where I was talking about the shills and some of those things. I won't apologize for the banter or anything like that, but if people basically were on the fence, if you're listening essentially to an episode of Iron Culture and you feel that it's therefore maybe not potentially inclusive, where you come with a position that we're either, we're in opposition, so maybe there's a sensitive topic, and we start from the outset not being accusatory or anything, but maybe there's like some minor inflammatory language, like maybe I don't know. I can't remember it, but I do know that on occasion it's happened. I do want to say that I thought you wrote a stellar article for Mass, just about how to communicate with people, and that the intent always, I will, like, for instance, I'll objectify Eric. I'm going to continue doing that. I'm not going to apologize for that. I'm not going to apologize for the banter. But in terms of impressionable individuals listening to our podcast and then maybe being once again potentially then turned off by the discourse, that is never the intention.
Well, they didn't say which host, so it is just as possible that there was some snark from me on the Turkesterone episodes. And I'm actually really glad that you read this review, Omar, because I think while it's easy to be high and mighty and self-righteous and talk about, maybe it's not easy, but the article I wrote could very easily be perceived as, if you looked at certain things I've done in the span of my career or said publicly, you can find instances where it's hypocritical for me to say, and here's the way you combat, pseudoscience or BS. I do the best I can, but I think it's really important to acknowledge that science-based communicators, for one, we're not taught to think that way and to understand, it's not in our typical education stream to think about how do we change hearts and minds. If you go to school for exercise science or nutrition, you get taught exercise science and nutrition, not necessarily how do I discuss with people who are under false are giving out false information for whatever their motivation, whatever it may be, whether it's disinformation or misinformation. How do I combat that? That's not what we're taught. And the one thing you can almost be sure of for someone who went and got a master's degree or a PhD or even just a bachelor's degree and then pursued a career in fitness, studying these topics, is that they love it and they care about it. So when they see someone putting out incorrect information, especially if it could be harmful, especially if they think they're doing it for personal gain or have malicious intent, an emotional reaction should be expected. And even though it's less than ideal to put that out there and express that with sarcasm, derision, shaming, I think that is probably the natural tendency for most people. So what we were asking people to do in that last episode and what we were suggesting, especially for certain personality types, is going to be the hard thing to do. It's not going to be the easy thing to do. So I am sure there were times where both of us or either one of us in either that episode or in the entirety of our careers, if you look back, haven't always done what we're preaching. I think it's good to acknowledge that, because then it makes it clear that we also need to, what is the saying, Omar? The change starts with you,
I thought you were going to bring up Man in the Mirror, Michael Jackson. Not the individual, but the lyrics. Like, I'm talking to the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways. What a hunk. He's trying to use that royal we. It could have been either one of us. It was myself, Eric. And don't worry, I already baked into this opening intro skit. So that was sincere, but something to make myself feel better. So you didn't have to do that, because right above that review was a 1-star review, a 1 out of 5. I'm not even actually joking, Eric. It's not right above it. It's like, so our average rating is like 4.9. So like, let's be clear, we're rated very highly, but it was like a few bumped up, a few above that. And it's legit. You can look it up. Just look, Iron Culture reviews. It's a 1 out of 5 star, and it says Trexler is a douche. It says, I have suspicious of the influence lobbyists have on both. So I have suspicions on. I'm just gonna rephrase the way.
Read it exactly the way it's written. So the person who posted it, their name is what?
Oh, okay. So it's nullfan89 _. Mm-hmm. So I will say, I'm suspicious of the influence lobbyists have on both the medical industry and public policy. Trexler, yeah, you're probably just a flat earther. I don't think that was a charitable overview of Eric as he was conversing, about the carnivore diet. I think we had him on when we did that flip. That was amusing to me when I was like 3 out of 5. I'm like, no, they are absolutely right. Like, I can be snarky or like, just in general is what you overviewed. And then I saw a 1 out of 5 review for Trex. I was like, come on. I'm like, nah, I can't abide by that. Trexler's the man.
Yeah, I mean, that might as well be just like a troll review, in my opinion, based on that.
Yeah, so. But it's the compliment sandwich, where then we come back with the latest review that I just saw as us, and then we'll get to it, because we've been hinting at it, folks. You can go ahead and leave a rating review. We do tend to read them. It's just like the YouTube comments. We really do appreciate them, because it's a chance for us to interact with you guys.
And more importantly, we're struggling to find content at this stage, folks. So when you review us, then we can review you, and then that becomes our content, which then you can provide a review on. So you're actually literally participating in this podcast, because we've got nothing else. And we just appreciate you rating your favorite Instagram React podcast. So,
we're just shadows of our former selves. I do have something I want to say after about that, but this is a 5-star review. It's by Moltar49, guests of all types. It goes, Eric and Omar are beholden only to their muscular tissue, and for this fact, I am grateful. Guests range from very intelligent humans to very intelligent humans with grand amounts of lean tissue. I love how there's never a wasted moment, as all words from the top of the pyramid are received as blessings. You will find all of your life's questions answered within the genius of Eric and Omar's dialogues, and sometimes trilogues and quadrilogues. Thank you for such incredible work, Eric and Omar. May I die with the ribaldry in my ears and your names on my lips. Eric, let's pause for a second. I read that. He's challenging now my vocabulary. Ribaldry. That's like it's like banter. It's like snark. It's like lowbrow kind of humor banter. Is that I don't know. I'm not gonna look it up.
My man had the thesaurus open in the other browser tab. That's all I gotta say. And I'm not even mad about it.
Yeah.
I'm impressed with the effort. And if you didn't have that browser tab open on Thesaurus, Ooh, Scrabble champ up in the house.
Is that it? I don't know. No, maybe.
Don't ask me. I study getting jacked.
God.
I don't know what ribaldry is.
I don't want
man.
to make I don't want to make a correction now. I don't. So Eric, the one that was funny, the comment. So and then we're gonna get to the topic. Is like these people like come on, you gotta love it. So it's doctor in quotations. Eric Helms claims there are 27 letters in the alphabet. Didn't attend kindergarten class. That's how if they were to do a
I got grandfathered in.
Bro. Yeah. Like I do like YouTube. TikTok's the worst for that, and we're actually going to get to the topic, but where they want to do a hit piece, they'll find one thing that someone has said in like their 10-year career, and they're like, can't trust them, like that.
I'm telling you, you know, people, you got to look for it, but you can find it, and then anyone can be canceled. That's the way it should be, to be honest. Gotta hold ourselves to a high standard. No mistakes ever in life. Period.
So, Eric, we're going to move to everyone's favorite part of every single Iron Culture episode moving forward, which is us reacting to comments or things on Instagram. I do want to say this new phase of our career, and people will look back on this lovingly. Let's use a classic American hero, because we brought up Stuck Together. We always talk about the cinematic masterpieces that define our generations and generations to come. Let's bring up an American hero, Kevin Costner. Eric, when you hear that name in the hallowed halls of the cult, what are like some of his big hits? Was like, he was known for that. Like, what would you just say? Like, shoot from the hip. Give me two.
Waterworld.
You stop. No, stop, Eric.
Easy.
Some
of the best movies.
No, you need to stop. This is how I know. Despite us having there's a few years age difference between us, but I feel like we've experienced a lot of the same things. I was going to mention Waterworld because what I was going to say, people probably know him from either the mediocre classic Tin Cup, the romance film, The Bodyguard, or maybe Robin Hood. Doesn't really matter, or like Dances with Wolves. Those are like the tentpole ones that everyone mentions, right, Eric? The hardcore person, this is why there's only one Eric. Waterworld was the biggest flop when it was released. This is true.
No. You got to frame it right. It is at the time was the highest grossing expenses film of all time.
Right. Yeah. Yes. That is a true statement. And people and critics panned it. They said, why would you show Kevin Costner's feet? Why are they webbed? Why did anyone think this was intriguing? But people will look back, maybe not even in 2022 because it's still panned, but I think we just got to fast forward to like 21-22 and he will be absolved, and that will be the thing.
I just like thinking about the creative process, like the ideation that went into Waterworld, you know, like, because you just get a couple of execs in a room, you know, two of them have a cocaine addiction. The third guy is pretty much checked out 5 years ago. And one of them is like, yeah, I just saw Mad Max again. It's fantastic. And you're like, hey, who's hot right now who could play that role? Kevin Costner. You're like, hey, I just got a jet ski. And it goes, quiet, I just had an idea, you know? Put them together. Actually, so you know what's crazy? I'm gonna just like ribaldry. Honestly, I'm shaky. Like I'm gonna read the comments from the YouTube, but I'm not gonna look it up because we're doing this live, and that's the beautiful part. It's like bro, this is like a tightrope walk doing the Iron Cult with you. Let's be honest. No one's gonna be talking about us getting ribaldry wrong because we've just pissed off all the hardcore Waterworld fans. That's the only comments we're gonna get. It's such a well-known film, and it's such an American classic that us taking shots at it like that, I suspect it's going to overshadow anything else in this episode.
So, Eric, I'm going to say another potentially incorrect statement, but this might blow your mind. I think I'm wrong, so I'm just saying this out loud.
Perfect. So definitely say it.
I think he was the director, dude.
Maybe he was the guy who got the jet ski.
Bro, imagine. Sorry, let's go one step further, and then we're really beginning this thing. Imagine he's one of the diehards, like one of the first 50 or what are the leave comments. He's like, how can you do me like this? A2 Brute. Like, I have been a member of the cult. You don't know this. I have my luxurious home gym that's like 4,000 square feet, and I listen to the cult.
Kevin Costner was literally just about to do his first Masters powerlifting meet and just dropped out as soon as he heard this episode.
Damn.
And I'm sorry, Kevin. I loved you in The Bodyguard. No shade. Everyone makes mistakes, even us right now in saying all of this. So maybe we should just move on, Omar.
Yeah, let's move on. And so Speaking, this is relevant, considering the previous episode, and we're trying to have the conversation, not who's to blame, but when we talk about like they that spread either misinformation or disinformation, like what is going on here. And then we saw one of our homies, Mr. Alan Flanagan, which I understand it might not. Yeah, let me correct. Oh,
you better sort your shit out.
Did he? Is he now Dr. Alan Flanagan?
Well, I went to go ahead and look at the most official way of determining whether someone finished their PhD, which is his Instagram profile. And it now is Alan Flanagan, MSc, PhD. Ooh. So I remember last time when we talked about, or I think before we hopped on air, he had just had his thesis defense or was just about to have his PhD or oral defense. So I think he must have successfully defended it because he's now a part of the medical conspiracy as someone with a doctorate. So,
damn.
So welcome, both me and him. They hate us.
Yeah, they hate us.
And no, we hate them. That's the way it works. Doctors hate. We hate them. Yeah, that's right.
The big T. Now, Eric, he made a post that we both were talking about, and I do think it's worth addressing when we're talking about this conversation, people that contribute to the space, who's responsible for some of these things. I want you either to read it, cover it. I want someone from, once again, the Howard Halls of now academia to give some commentary, and also someone who participates on social media, because I do think it gives a unique perspective. Take it away, my friend.
Yeah. No, so I actually saw this post, and I was like, that's really good. But it was like a step-by-step guide on Instagram of how to become like a quack. Yep. And it was like, go to medical school, make these claims, write these books, etc. But the whole post was basically saying, hey, most of the folks who the evidence-based crowd pick on are the fit tea sellers, the influencers, and they're probably not the most egregious and most problematic contributors to misinformation and disinformation. And I think the most convincing thing, and to be fair, this is books, so I would be curious as to where the proportion of influential like social media posts come from, as if this still transfers. But I think it's really important. He posted a open access publication by Martin and colleagues titled Science, Advocacy, and Quackery in Nutritional Books, an analysis of conflicting advice and purported claims of nutritional bestsellers. And they had a pie chart of the author occupation, and most of them were between 2.4 to 6% of this pie chart, everything from editors, entrepreneurs, personal trainers, nutritionists, actors, bloggers, dietitians, biochemists, journalists, TV personalities. And they had a category that was other with 13.3%, but far and away the largest piece of the pie at 33.7%, more than a third, was physicians. So we're talking MDs. So I think this is a really important thing to be aware of, is that people are not, like I said before, you're not immune. If you remember that me saying that a couple times in the last episode. Having an education, but not necessarily having that critical thinking piece, and then having a little bit of expert creep and a fair amount of ego is all it takes to see why this is the way it is. And how many folks are there out there who have tried to cash in on their credibility to sell a simple, controversial solution that many times they may believe. I don't always think it's disinformation, or to become an advocate for this one simple trick. And it's so ironic to me that they often do sell an anti-establishment message, even though they are part of the establishment as a physician, supposedly.
Yep.
It's almost like having a presidential candidate who tries to get into office based on the fact that they're not part of it. And then even as they are a candidate, they seem like they're anti-government. I'm like, you're the head of the executive branch. No one's buying this. Of course, unfortunately, they do. But anyway, to me, it's this very similar thing. If you're out there attacking the medical establishment as an MD, it's probably not fully like an authentic thing they're doing. I look at that and I go you're definitely playing to emotions and somehow still trying to have your cake and eat it too, as having this position of authority and the perspective of an expert. So anyway, I'll go ahead and read. Oh shit, I clicked off of it. I'm not going to go ahead and read it because then I don't want too much time. But Alan basically said, hey, it's easy to attack the person who is, you know, the dude with the abs, who's like the bro science person, or the fit chick, you know, quote unquote, who is, you know, wearing, you know, Gymshark stuff, looking over her shoulder, and, you know, it bothers you for whatever reason, and they seem like an easy target. But they're more often spreading misinformation. They are not necessarily immediately seen as credible beyond the fact that they're in good shape, you know? And arguably a far greater problem is these people who you can't distinguish. Like, the average person is going to have a really tough time distinguishing from some quack with a PhD or an MD who's talking about something that may not actually be in their expert area. But I mean, the average person consuming content doesn't know that someone with an MD is actually far less trained in nutrition than someone with a bachelor's degree in nutrition, right? They don't know that. So why would you expect them to not, trust the doctor? And the fact that that's being exploited, I think, is arguably a far greater problem than the fact that there are, and always have been, basically jocks in shape who promote this shit worked for me, and then someone offers them money. I think there is a far greater problem to be solved, and there's probably more mechanisms to solve it if we're talking about people who are actually going through pathways of education. Like, we can influence curriculum. We can have there be more ethical standards related to especially regulated professions like physicians or dietitians, etc. But we can't really stop people from doing the social media equivalent of hanging out by the squat rack and saying, X, Y, and Z really worked well for me. Like, hey, fish thins the skin. Like, that's going to keep happening. And if it happens on social media, what are you going to do about it? They're not claiming it as medical advice. They're not medical professionals. But the fact that there are medical professionals out there promoting that, I think I'm really glad that Alan, I should say Dr. Flanagan, promoted that awareness.
Eric, well said. And I can't help but feel that, kind of like it's been co-opted a little bit. Some people, either in the evidence-based space or otherwise, they see some of the practices that occur and get great results in other areas where you choose an easy target. So, like, we joked about this. It could be from someone from the left, someone from the right. Like, let's say on YouTube, like, dumb liberal gets roasted or whatever. Like, it doesn't matter, whichever way. But they're looking for the easy win. So they're looking at not giving a charitable representation of either that entire position or that person. They're looking at using a soundbite and then having an easy slam dunk. And I can't help but feel kind of what Alan is insinuating there, or directly saying, is that it's overrepresented the amount of influence some of these, in quotations, influencers have on the general public. It's more likely that those people that are in trusted positions of authority that then are, like, knowledge being domain specific. It's like, oh, whatever. I'm making this up. Eric, as an example, like, I'm a doctor. I'm an MD. Time to talk about the carnivore diet, how it saved my life. Like, this is the one for you. That's far more harmful because you are in a position of trust, and then the downstream consequences that occur, rather than Chuck in the squat rack, like we're joking when we say that, who has like an IG following of 50,000 followers, like, Chuck gets buff, Chuck's talking about thinning the skin. It's like, yeah, they're like listening in quotations, but like that doctor carries some serious weight in society.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, this is something I'd like to think we're pretty aware of, and we've actually talked about, not necessarily as directly as Alan spoke to it. Because back in episode 132, we had an episode titled, Where Does Bro Science Come From? And that title in and of itself is actually somewhat of a misnomer, because I talked about in that episode how often, quote unquote, bro science actually starts from science that it was either misrepresented, miscommunicated, or just wasn't up to date, or tried to over-conclude based upon the data it had. So the idea that you got to eat more frequently to burn more calories and lose fat started in the science. The idea that after a certain time you shouldn't eat started in the science. These are all based upon acute studies looking at substrate metabolism rather than net fat loss over time. Or say a single subject design in a boxer that found when he ate 6 meals a day, he burned more calories. But it's, again, a single subject design. We don't know if that actually pans out, etc. And those are just the two examples that came up off the top of my head. I can absolutely think of others. So there is a lot of, or basically the hype around protein timing. That's another one. There's a lot of the meal timing stuff that actually did come from scientific research that was just incomplete and maybe a little exaggerated when it hit the public. So yeah, I think those are the things that are far harder to change. You know, when I was reviewing the research that I wanted to talk about to make my points in the last episode on how to combat BS and pseudoscience, one thing that kept coming up was how ineffective retractions are in the literature, in the scientific literature, and how ineffective corrections are in the media. That once an idea is out there and it becomes something that is repeated and sounds truthy, and started from a semi-legitimate source, or sorry, even started from a legitimate source, but was wrong, it doesn't, the retractions don't get the same kind of press. There is not, like, all of the people who promote retractions and bad science, it's not the establishment. It is not in the best interest of the journals, and certainly not in the best interest of the authors themselves who had their article retracted, to promote the fact that they got retracted. It's not in the best interest of a journalist or a news outlet to say, hey, we got it wrong. So it's always like Retraction Watch, which is just an independent couple of people who are involved in science who are putting it out there, or the people who, you know, God bless their souls, are the ones who are actually just going through data to see if it's, you know, legitimate, and then, you know, writing letters to the editor, you know. So shout out to the folks who did the white paper on all the Barbalos stuff, you know, Knuckles and Co., along with James Steele and them, you know, like, that's relatively unforgiving work. The journals don't really want to do this. They will begrudgingly do it. You know, the media outlets don't really want to correct things. They will begrudgingly do it. And because of that, they're understandably going to have far less of an impact than the initial article. So that's a tough spot to be in. So that's why it's so important to try to get it right the first time. And yeah, I mean, you know, a random one that is completely not from our field at all is the idea that that wolves are, you know, dogs are the descendants of wolves, right? So the way you need to train dogs is you need to be an alpha male. You need to be the alpha, because dogs operate in packs just like wolves. And this is actually based upon research, and I could be slightly wrong, but my wife did her bachelor's degree and was a dog trainer for a long time, and in this area, so she's relatively well informed. But anyway, initial research in like wolf rescues, I believe in Yosemite, found that they formed a pack, right? So it was true in the research. They found that wolves established, you know, they figured out who was dominant and they formed a pack. But this is only true in a captive environment of wolves from a whole bunch of different families. The actual natural setting of wolves is a family unit. So it is based upon the parent. And they're not actually like quote unquote pack animals in the way we think of it, that they form like it's this constant fight between 30 wolves to figure out who's the alpha, and it can change over time. That is what they do when they're divorced from their natural environment and thrown into a room. It's kind of like if we had a post-apocalyptic society and you took 30 humans and threw them into a prison, what would happen? Yeah, we're not that different, you know?
Yeah.
So yes, dogs do descend from wolves, and, you know, so they have those same tendencies, but that's not the way they operate. And yes, you can intimidate a dog into being the alpha and they'll listen to you, but is that the relationship you want to have with your dog? Or should you maybe use positive reinforcement so they're not like scared of you and do what you want? So there's an entire training industry, and there's huge personalities based on the idea that you need to be the alpha, like Cesar Millan, for example. Apparently, he's like the, you know, no disrespect to the dead, but like the Charles Poliquin of like that world. You know, yeah. he's the charlatan who promotes a whole theory based upon something that's incorrect. You know, so it's funny. I learned that parallel, and here's where the connection to what I was saying previously is. The lead author of that study, the one who did that initial research, for the last 30 or 40 years, because this is done in the 70s, has been trying to correct that myth, has been saying, no, this only applies in this very specific circumstance. That's not the way wolves operate. And all of the things based upon that assumption are based on a flawed premise. Please stop promoting this. But here we are today. You know, so 40 years have not changed the fact that that has taken hold in our societal conscious, and that's just the way we think it operates. So, you know, for all of you who are involved in like the evidence-based fitness space, and you've found out all these pop culture things that people believe are actually wrong or slightly off or potentially harmful in some cases, I've come to learn every time I interact with any other field the same thing exists there. So like I'm highly skeptical anytime I hear like hey, did you know you only use 10% of your brain? Or hey, do you know lightning only strikes twice? Or hey, did you know, like anytime I hear anything like that, my first thought is, yeah, probably not. You know? So yeah.
No, Eric, that was wonderful. And wow, am I about to say something that's going to be definitely divisive? But you said two things. So one, how like retractions will not often work. And then two, you said not to speak ill of the dead. Man, I'm just going to say I couldn't help but think of Colin Powell. And you said for the last 30 years, Colin Powell, who recently passed away, his biggest regret was that he was the trusted figure that doubled down on the assumption by the United States that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And after they retracted that, so, and when you poll Americans, like the average American, there's still a high percentage that believe that there were indeed, even though he spent basically his last, let's say, what would it be, Eric, 15 years? I don't know, like whenever it came out, they went there and there was nothing there, you know. We don't have to get into that, but 15 years. And he still said, like, basically on his deathbed, it was his biggest regret. It's just interesting.
And there was literally a study done on that belief. That was one of the few backfire effect studies that I alluded to in the last episode, that when conservatives who believe that weapons of mass destruction were found in Iraq were presented with the retractions, they doubled down on their beliefs. And they were more likely to believe that weapons of mass destruction were found in the Middle East. And it's not a conservative thing. Yeah. They also found that not that there was a backfire effect, but that liberals were unmoved when they were showed retractions of the statement that George Bush banned stem cell research. So that was a common belief or it was a common talking point on the left during the Bush administration. The reality is that he didn't. I think he stopped federal funding for it, but he did nothing to stop stem cell research in the private industry. So that's the more nuanced, accurate way of viewing it. But there were, I think John Kerry at the time stated that. There were newsreels that stated that. And when the liberals who believed that George Bush did actually, ban stem cell research during his presidency, were given information that wasn't the case, they didn't change their position. They didn't make it worse. So there was no backfire effect, but they were unmoved by the reality. So it's not something that is just something that happens in one political ideology. It happens in all political ideologies.
And Eric, let me just say that's what's so wonderful about the cult is that there's not these divisive, different political ideologies. We're one cohesive unit. Some would call it fundamentalism, where we have there's the tenets, they're immovable, they're immutable, and we rule atop. But really, we say that the cohesiveness builds order, and order allows everything to flourish underneath it. We don't check in with anyone, but it's like when you're way atop the pyramid, it's really hard to see down below. But it looks like everything's going fine.
It's simple. When you're always right, you don't have to worry about being wrong.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah. Strength is never a weakness. It's like when you just say things like that, they just sound so true.
Now that I think about it, weakness would never be a strength there either, right?
Damn. Oh, no.
Wow.
So, Eric, now I will say...
Just like the Bible says, the strong shall inherit the earth. So, there you go.
I think Jesus was a huge proponent of, who had the biggest bench press had the biggest authority. That meek shit...
And not only on that, but also squashing weak bugs. I think that was his thing.
Right. Yeah.
If someone turns the other cheek... You throw a barbell at him. That's what I heard.
Yeah. You start that beef. No, bro, this has been a rich episode of banter, and I can't believe this guy literally said Waterworld, because I was gonna get to that. I was gonna say the unsung. How does this guy know? But we're really giving the cult what they want, so we did the react portion on Instagram, and then we're revisiting that Q&A where we said at the inception, Eric, we said there were 3 questions. There were 3, and then my man Eric just went it was fantastic.
That was my fault.
Well, no. Is natural bodybuilding dead? The meta conversation I thought was super interesting. And then, we're like an hour and 10 minutes. And we only had our intro that was 10 minutes long. So it was a full hour conversation about this thing. And I think it was important, really important to get your perspective. And then we spoke about, pre-workout nutrition. We spoke about carbohydrates. And there was the third one. So we're going to revisit it because it's interesting once again.
The lost third comment. Well, the lost third question of Iron Culture. Starring Kevin Costner.
Starring in his comeback film. Oh, wait, it got shelved. Ooh.
That's all right. Nick Cage will do it.
Yeah. Eric, I'm not even going to lie. Okay, I feel like I'm in a transparent phase right now for this episode. I looked it up. I'm 1 for 2 right now, potentially. It wasn't directed by Kevin Costner because I wanted to say it was after while you were talking. It was directed by a dude called Kevin Reynolds. So that ribaldry, my definition of it, of like gallows humor, is kind of what I said. Like, it just seems like that. I could be 0 for 2 right now. I can't strike out 3. I can't be 3 strikes, my dude.
So here's the unfortunate thing is,
oh no,
you started with claiming that Kevin Costner directed Waterworld.
Yeah.
And now you just did a retraction.
Ooh.
And we know, based upon what I said, no effect. Everyone is going to now believe forever that Kevin Costner directed Waterworld. So,
man, this
sorry,
guy's,
folks.
It's kind of like Stuck on You. Now I'll say this. So our boy Dustin Colby, which is great. I will be honest, Eric, maybe I was the one because I get intimidated by 2 first names. There's no hyphen. It's not hyphenated. It's not like Dustin Colby, but it kind of just reads like Dustin Colby. But this question, like, this could be a whole episode, which is why we're talking about it, and we do have some personal parallel insights that I think will be interesting. Where Dustin Colby said, "Why do some people get derailed when the routines get thrown off, and other people show resilience from unexpected challenges, including high-level athletes?" And I think this is a fascinating conversation. I want to kick it over to you. I want to kick it over to the stud, the academic, the person who's the coach of coaches that maybe has a few world champions under their belt and 1 professional toner. I'm not going to ask you who your favorite athlete is, but nonetheless, you have a lot of insight, Eric. I want you to talk about this because this is a pertinent question for much of the cult.
Yeah, and first off, with a name like Dustin Colby, you know where he sits on the spectrum. He's like, why do some people have trouble sticking with this, and other people seem to just shrug it off, no problem? And then he walks away, ching, 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 gets on his white horse and rides into the sunset with his white-ass lats just blocking out the sun. So this is definitely a jacked cowboy with a name like that. So he has no problem. It's in his soul. When he's not out wrangling cattle, he's wrangling PRs. So keep doing you, Dustin Colby. But no, this is a very good question. And I think this actually kind of goes back to something I brought up in the last episode, the Transtheoretical model, which I think you identified as showing that we had what Marxist creep into the podcast, the fact that I acknowledged that humans have feelings, which fair enough. That's the only way to interpret that. So the Transtheoretical model, it kind of outlines that the final stage is maintenance, right? And maintenance, the whole thing is that you are in a phase where you are anticipating and learning to deal with and strategizing on how to deal with the unavoidable reality that you're going to have setbacks and you're going to have hiccups, and you might slide back and have, time off or injuries or whatever. You can take the given habit or goal or cessation of a habit. What is the inverse of that? It's going to happen, but how do we get back on track? So I think advanced athletes, it is part and parcel of what they do. And I think the difference, I try to reflect on, how did things feel when I was in the quote unquote honeymoon phase with lifting? It's all I could think about. It was, say, the first 2, 3, 4, 5 years of lifting for me. My life revolved around it. My life still does revolve around lifting, but more in an actual, like, mechanical, logistical sense. Like, if I wrote down what I do on paper, you're like, oh, that's all related to lifting, which just means I'm a one-dimensional person, really. But back then, my emotional being and my thoughts all revolved around lifting as well. And I think the difference is that I had never experienced a setback, and I was wholly engaged in this new world that meant so much to me. And I was writing my own story as I went. It was a self-defining activity. It was a very new endeavor. So while it looked like on a day-to-day basis, Eric Helms in 2022 and Eric Helms in 2004 were doing the same thing, training more days out of the week than not, eating a high-protein diet, training hard, thinking about and planning for the future, having similar goals. The mentality I had then is very different than the mentality I had now. I couldn't even relate to the idea of a setback back then. But now I've had hip surgery. I've had post-contest blues. I've gained 48 pounds in 2 months post-show and been like, oh my God, can I even do this sport? I've experienced struggles with trying to balance life with work and training, being too obsessive. I've gone through phases where I'm unable to make gains on a certain lift for years, stuck around the same bench press. I've gone through phases where I'm completely frustrated with my inability to get the shoulder flexion I need to actually perform a jerk properly. And God, I hate this. I've gone through periods where my neck was so jacked up that I thought that if I ever did overhead press again, I'd be risking, paralysis. So I just have a very, very different perspective now, having been lifting for, coming up on 18 years.
Yeah.
So it's a different mentality because I know what's on the other side now, because I've been on the other side multiple times. So I think part of the resilience is that not everyone, unfortunately, because it's difficult. I want to really point out, not everyone sees the graveyard. We tell these stories of resilience because we focus on the people who made it through. Stories of someone with depression who overcame it. That's great, but a lot of people committed suicide. Some people don't make it. And I think there's a lot of people who lifted, they got thrown a curveball and they struck out and they haven't come back yet. So this question to some degree might be victim to survivorship bias.
Mm-hmm.
That by definition, the advanced athletes who seem to deal with that adversity better are people who have dealt with that adversity better. So it's kind of a chicken or the egg. They would not be advanced athletes. They would not have been around if they could not have overcome that adversity. So I don't think it's necessarily an innate quality of these advanced athletes that we should emulate them or learn from them to figure out how they dealt with adversity, because simply dealing with adversity, and we have data on this, builds self-efficacy. So if you think about it, you get thrown a curveball. There are some things in your power that you can do to try to deal with that, but there's a lot of things that are also not there. Let's say you get thrown a financial curveball at the same time that you lose a family member, at the same time that there's also a global recession, at the same time that you get an injury. The amount of things that are outside of your control that are happening simultaneously and what is inside of your control, in this case, and I don't think many people have experienced this, the chips are highly stacked against you. So even if you do a lot of things right and you really focus on what you can control, it's not a sure thing that you're going to come out on the other side staying in the game and being able to, turn those stumbling blocks into stepping stones. So comparing that person to an alternate reality version where that recession wasn't there and the family member didn't die and you did come out on the other side and they built self-efficacy while the other person actually lost self-efficacy in that process, but they're still the same fundamental person, and at that point, they took two different paths that had to do with things that were not under their locus of control. So I think the narrative that everyone is just the culmination of their own decisions and abilities and talents, positive or negative, is incomplete. It's not nature versus nurture, it's both, right? So we have to acknowledge the fact that there are, in some cases, people who have just as much resilience as a professional athlete who's overcome, cancer, for example, but they got more than cancer thrown at them, or something else that we're not aware of. It could be, mental illness. It could be all kinds of shit, family strife, things we don't understand, trauma from childhood coming back up, trauma from adulthood that's currently going on, whatever. So yeah, by definition, advanced athletes are people who have, through a combination of their innate qualities, good decisions, focusing on what they can, probably a great support network. They've come out on the other side of adversity and they're stronger for it. And now they're going to be better able to handle future adversity. But all the people who have not had those combinations of things doesn't necessarily mean they don't have the elements that one can control, but sometimes it's just not enough.
My man went all the way in, and Eric, that was powerful. My man's just crystallizing everything here, talking about the crucible. I think we had Mr. Dr. Ben House on, and I don't want to misrepresent what he said, but I think he referred to this general phrase, suffering capital, as something that one either accumulates over time or the experiences. And the way I kind of, at least from a personal standpoint, conceptualize it is that I think the world in general is way more random than people can ever anticipate. Like just the chaos that could potentially ensue. The one thing's to prepare, like when you lift, it's a controlled environment. It's kind of like gambling in a casino where you think you know what like randomness or like luck, but the odds are always like kind of the same. You know, like when you're rolling the dice or whatnot, like it's a 1 in several thousand. Well, you know what it is. The unknowns are actually all known. In a similar way, when you're training and you're trying to endeavor to be a more resilient person, so you're overcoming some of those hardships, those are planned. Like everything that you just said, Eric, they're all unplanned events that life throws at you. And sometimes it's almost, to me, and I've seen the exact same thing, man, if someone gets thrown too much at an earlier stage, more than they're able to handle, then there are some potential deleterious effects. So it manifests itself like what you're saying about, potential consequence, not achieving the goals, but it's all about the general arrow that seems to occur with those that are able to handle that volatility of life is that over time, whatever that dose is, let's say of chaos or randomness or adversity, was not over the amount that they're able to handle, at least on average, and so that they build a sense of robustness rather than what you're getting at, Eric. I do think it's a naive notion. Like I was going to crack this joke about, I saw on social media this therapist talking about, like, oh, you just said trauma. That is one of the most misused phrases because no one really has trauma unless like you would know. Have you been in a war environment? Are you one of just the one in several hundred? I'm like, all right, just calm down. I think that's really not being helpful to the conversation. I was going to say that I think when all those things add up and we talk about robustness and we talk about someone overcoming, there is that naive notion of exceptionalism that just because someone has succeeded in their own life with their own like time course of events, that it's applicable, their success, for everyone else. And even more so, exactly what you said, talking about adversity. It's also this idea that someone that maybe had an easier pathway, you could achieve more going through less and actually be less robust than someone that's achieved less despite being more robust. Like the two are they're not the same, they're not analogous whatsoever, and that's a hard thing for people to even conceptualize in the first. So I like, Eric, there's so many things that you said, but even the one where you said about resilience from people, like for including high level athletes, that they wouldn't be, they're the ones that survived the graveyard. And emulating, it's like when people ask, oh, they're million, let's pull million, like what are the shared traits that millionaires have that then we can emulate as individuals? Like, well, maybe, let's say
their parents were millionaires.
Yeah, poor as well. It's like, so let's say like
I started with a small $1 million loan to pull myself up from the bootstraps. No, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, bro. It's like, so like, let's say out of the 100 millionaires they polled, 90%, so the dominant trait, 90% were more pro-risk takers than the average person. But if you look at the graveyard of people that started and were entrepreneurs, you would notice in the graveyard of people that wanted to be successful, it might be 98%. So actually, that might not be the quality that defines them being a millionaire. In fact, it could be more harmful in theory, and that it might not be descriptive of why they're a millionaire in the first place. But sorry, I want you to go on because I think it's a very necessary conversation, because not that someone once said we're all going to make it, not that you're not going to make it, but just this idea is like setback. There's light at the end of the tunnel. These people seem to know what they're doing. What can we learn from them? It's like it doesn't really work like that.
Yeah, and in some ways it can. You know, it's a complex topic because there's the reality, which is the picture I tried to paint, and then there's the practicality of what attitude is facilitative and what can you do. Like it would be nice if the just world fallacy was true, that we were all given an equal shake at birth or in society, and therefore a level playing field and a meritocracy would allow people to, show their potential, and someone's potential did accurately reflect the work and efforts and gifts that they put in, right? But I don't think anyone's under the illusion that is the case. I think people are on a different spectrum based upon their experiences and the information they're exposed to as to how close or far from the truth that is. But I think whether you're someone who's like a pure determinist and super nihilistic about society, or whether you're someone who's like, you know, everyone can pull themselves up from their bootstraps, in the end, you have to do the same thing. Whether you're poor, you know, not able-bodied, you know, raised during a recession in a third world country and you want to be an entrepreneur, or if you're, you know, already starting off with a high SES, good education, support, emotionally healthy, all those things, and you want to be an entrepreneur, in either case, you just have to bust your ass and overcome the scenario that's there. So it's like, I remember I used to really subscribe to like the philosophy of extreme ownership, you know, which is just the idea, and this actually came from bodybuilding. I think I've talked about this on Iron Culture before, where I met some people who their immediate response to being placed lower than they wanted or they thought was to blame the judging or blame politics. And I immediately realized they feel better because of this. Like they feel shitty after getting placed lower, and this alleviates that shitty feeling. But then the unintended consequence of that is it also means that they don't have to do anything to change. It absolves them of power. It actually removes their own power to be able to do anything about it. And it's this delicate balance where when you point out the inequities, you also don't want to disenfranchise people and victimize them, or victimize yourself so that you don't have the power to move forward. Like, but we have to point out the inequities, right? Or we can't solve things, whether it's in politics or as a trainer. Like, not everyone comes to you with the same genetic talents, and they need to have realistic expectations about what they can achieve. Some people are more injury prone. This can literally apply to anything in life. It almost sounds like I'm talking about politics, but I literally am thinking about, you know, training and genetics and all that stuff. This isn't like libertarianism versus, a nanny state or whatever, anything like that. It is really, I'm thinking about like, I'm thinking about the question, but it does apply to other avenues of life. But I think extreme ownership, so long as it's not used as a weapon against others, I think is really valuable. If you're saying like, look, you know, if you make everything your fault and you figure out what you can do so you stay enfranchised and powerful in every situation, that doesn't give you it doesn't even make sense from like an epistemological perspective. Like, you don't have knowledge on what else someone else overcome, nor do you have knowledge about what you could overcome, even though you have this philosophy. If it was harder, you might crack under the pressure, you know? So it is a naive supposition to assume that because you're able to apply extreme ownership, like which I believe I've done in my life and succeeded, that I would be able to do the same if I was, say, born in, you know, a poor area in Africa or Asia or something like that, you know, or if I had, if I was dyslexic or something like that. I'm just trying to think, like, I would like to think I would overcome that and still be somewhere close to where I am today and be successful. But man, I don't know that's true. And for me to even more than just applying it to myself, how bullshitty is it and mean, really, and just honestly, just arrogant to then do that to other people and be like, well, if you just applied extreme ownership and you were able to overcome this, you'd be fine. So everything is your fault. So I think having it as an internal locus of control to build self-efficacy is a great attitude. Extreme ownership, that's all about it, you know? In every situation I'm in, I look for how can I have power in the situation so I can move forward? How do I overcome this adversity? And then also, importantly, that's not to say that I don't acknowledge the pain or the challenge or the frustration I have. I don't sweep it under the rug, because I don't think that's healthy. Especially, it's not healthy if you're being the support for someone else. You don't just immediately move to problem solving when they're still trying to express, you know, grief or frustration. Trust me, as someone who's stayed married for 16 years. Yeah, don't move in to fix it until you've actually, you know, dealt with the pain initially. Anyway, so I think that extreme ownership mentality, great philosophy to live by, terrible philosophy to judge others by. But it is true that no matter where you're at, overcoming it is all you can do. You know, what else are you going to do? You lay down and die, right? That's it. So I do understand how there's this push and pull between these different ideologies, because sometimes they don't acknowledge the other side of it. It's very difficult if you have a whole personality and identity built around extreme ownership and empowerment and focusing on what you can do and letting go of the rest, to acknowledge like inequities between people, you know? think about it from a fitness perspective. Like there's the one person who this works for me, and they're Mr. Olympia, and they have 1,000 followers who do it, and they're all kind of, you know, making some gains, but it doesn't work that well for 1,000 people. So like, it's not a great program if it works for 1 out of 1,000 people. And it's hard to acknowledge that as the person who's Mr. Olympia, because then you have to acknowledge that despite following a relatively shitty program, you're doing pretty well, you know, like you are so talented and you have such gifts that you can get to the top of the mountain, and taking the same work ethic approach doesn't get other people there. It takes some of the steam out of some of the wind out of those sails, right? So, you know, and that's not to say that people at the top of the mountain aren't extremely hard workers. They are. So that is a requirement. No matter where you started, if you want to get to the top, you're not going to find people in any well-populated sport or endeavor that actually has, you know, statistics of like, we got the full bell curve population. The people at the top who are performing the best in those instances where there's a sufficient population participating, they're all incredibly hard workers. So it is true. That is an absolute requirement. However, and that's where the divide between those two perspectives is, and it must be acknowledged. And that's where I try to sit most of the time is, what do we do about it? You have to overcome it. That's all there is. But yes, you don't have the same cards. You're playing Uno, and they got a full house. They're playing poker over here. You're not even in the same game, bruh. You know, so yeah.
Some good old Texas Hold'em. No, I believe it was one of my favorite episodes that we had an economist who also was a hunky bodybuilder, where his personal philosophy was to maximize given the constraints. That, now, let me just say, that is totally a model borrowed from economics, but that notion, so you talk, Eric, now about extreme self-ownership, being a personal position as something you hold yourself to a certain standard, not others, which is, I think, so crucial, because I do think placing on yourself, like, what can I do? Oh, I want to do this. What is the situation like? And we've spoken about this before, you know, comparison being the thief of joy. It's one of those situations that I think when people are talking about setbacks or overcoming adversity or any of these things, is that when we take a look at this uneven playing field and you don't know what someone else has gone through, what the situation is like, then it really starts to feel uneven, because you're looking at yourself, you're looking at someone else, you're looking at what you've been through. And that entire process is then distracting you from your own potential journey of whatever you're going through. And I think online in social media with people that kind of amplifying that a little bit is that the whole conversation is centered around, like, the whole idea of comparison as a you know, in regards to one's personal journey. I think it's something that frames the whole situation incorrectly, because it gives this backdrop that isn't an accurate, once again, representation of A, what you need to do, or B, how you are doing. And I think that kind of sets up, that's like the starting point of being on a precipice then, where you think, like, the feeling of either being overwhelmed or can I do this, or all those situations, like the gradual building of robustness that occurs in a human when they overcome certain things. When you start stacking the chips against you, or when you're in an environment where the chips are stacked against you, then it could be much, much harder. So I think, like, we've spoken about this before, Eric, talking about it on an individual level. Like, we joke about the whole idea, like, gamifying the system or trying to analyze something. So now that we're taking personal responsibility and we're looking at ourselves and not saying, this is what you, like, dear listener, like, this is, like, these are the steps of what you should do, what you can do. Eric, do you want to give maybe a personal example? Do you want to give some examples from athlete, like obviously the remaining anonymous, or like general key core concepts, like what you said? I thought that was fantastic. No, like, hard work is always going to be there. Like, you're not going to be a world champion powerlifter. You're blessed with elite level strength genetics. You still got to squat, bench, deadlift. You still got to lift 4 days. You're going to have to go to RP8, RP9, RP10. Like, I do think there is one element of some of those stories. Like, there's that apocryphal tale of Ronnie Coleman. I'm making this up, like 93 or whatever. Like, he was natural and he entered a bodybuilding competition. It's like 2 years before he turned pro. And he basically looked like 80% Ronnie Coleman, and he was natural. It's like, that just tells you right there how important genetics are. It's like, well, yes, but let's not forget that my man was putting in a serious amount of work. Well, he is, you know, several, like, we're talking standard deviations above the average person in terms of genetics. that core concept of hard work was always there. So what would be, Eric, if you wanted to walk someone through some of this, where would you start? What would you talk about? Do you want to talk from a personal level? Where do you want to go?
No, I like that we're moving into the practical now. I think to get back to the core of the question of what are the things that you can do to make sure that when the curveball is thrown, you're more likely to come out on the other side of it. The thing that I've seen is the goal should be to make as many of the big rocks automated. And when I say automated, that's not quite the right word. More so, it's you want to reduce the amount of mental energy it takes to make those staples in your life. And this is something we've talked about before in Iron Culture. I think back in like 2019, we talked about advanced athletes and how they're different. I remember when in those first couple of years, that honeymoon phase, I was very mentally present during all the things like, oh, I'm going to eat another 2 hours. I'm excited about it. Like, that's good. You know, I'm creating a positive association with the behaviors that are going to help me get to where at least what I thought. You don't need to eat every 2 hours, you know, but the stuff I was doing, every set, every rep, focused on being training at the gym, thinking about my next workout. I was just so engaged and present, arguably obsessed, to sometimes, unfortunately, to the exclusion of other things I should have been focusing on in my life. It worked fine before I was married or dating anyone, and I was in the military, and it was all good for a certain point of time. Then it became problematic. But if you think about how it felt to be an early stage intermediate and a beginner, you were always engaged with it. And I think it's not the right attitude to try to get back to that, because you can't. But instead, you want to think about, like, what are the bare minimums? What are the big rocks? Being in an appropriate calorie size, surplus, deficit, maintenance, whatever for your big goal. Getting in a high protein diet, you know, making sure that you hit the gym at least, 3-4 times a week at a minimum type of deal. Making sure that you got some basic progressive overload built in one way or another. Making sure that you're getting some of your cardinal movements. Taking your creatine, you know, stuff like that. Eating your effing vegetables, you know, like whatever those big rocks are. The goal should be to not have to have that level of mental investment, which you will no longer have, no longer being a beginner or an intermediate. And I think the mistake that a lot of early stage folks do is they're so obsessed with this stuff that they try to get everything on board all simultaneously. And they're just really focused on it all. It could become overwhelming, and they're obsessing over too much. And a lot of the systems they have in place, they're sustainable for now, but not when they get thrown a curveball. Like, I remember I never thought I'd stop tracking until I stopped because it was just too stressful or whatever. And that was, you know, for a brief period post-contest, you know, like when just the post-contest blues and the extreme hunger, I couldn't stay on track, you know, and that really degraded my self-efficacy, gaining those 48 pounds post-show, finding that I was not this extreme ownership bodybuilding superhero of indomitable will, that I couldn't stop myself from going to get Taco Bell, and I felt like a total loser, and it changed my self-identity, and I realized I had to have a little more balance. But anyway, so I think the more you can do to reduce the mental energy necessary to have those big rocks in place, you're lifting up your fallback position, right? If you think about it as like old school trench warfare, you're making sure that, you know, this trench line that we're definitely not going to have to retreat from is moving forward. We're gaining ground over time, and we're pushing the enemy back, and they're having to change what their lines are each time. We're winning this war slowly but surely. So that way you're falling back into a position that is at the very least going to maintain where you're at without that necessary mental effort that maybe for whatever reason you can't put in right now. And then as you lick your wounds, you're dealing with whatever's going on, you know, licking them proverbially, not necessarily an injury. When you come back, you're in a position to move forward rather than having to regain a ton of ground. So, you know, Omar, you and I were talking off air, and as much as you might be going through what might feel like a bit of a slump, like, you haven't moved that far back in the grand scheme of things, you know? And it's similar, like, to kind of like some proof in the pudding. Remember when I got back into powerlifting for the first time? I'd done a meet in 2016, and I came back in 2020, and I did Auckland Champs I did the Auckland Cup, after doing Olympic weightlifting and strongman for like a full year. I only had a 6-week prep, and I totaled 600 kilos. And still today, my best total is 620. So like, it was 44 pounds behind my best total. And then from there, I was able to, by the next year, to total a PR. So it's unfortunately in garage nationals, but nonetheless, the point being is that I didn't regress back to, oh, I'm not a power lifter anymore. I regress back to, I'm a power lifter from like last year. You know, it's not a big deal from my last competition.
So Eric, a few things I couldn't help but think when we talk about the dose must be appropriate for someone then to have that competence, that sense of competence that, yes, I can overcome it. I couldn't help but think about this just because, once again, I've been watching a lot of MMA, and I was thinking about the quote by this lawyer that I like a lot, Brian Stevenson, where he says, "We're strongest in our broken places." How important do you think it is, Eric, contest prep, the fact that almost inevitably, you talked about the indomitable will, that you must face yourself in your deepest, darkest recesses, that everyone, like, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but basically it's kind of like wrestlers. So wrestlers talk about this, and that's why, not that there's a sunken look in a lot, it does, like Russian wrestlers, American wrestlers, but they're basically put in positions where they can't win. They must experience losses, so unwinnable positions. And in the same way, I kind of feel, in a small analogous way, when you're doing a bodybuilding prep, you're going to cheat. Like, you're going to fall off at some point because the amount of pressure and everything combined, and you're always trying to be leaner or in better condition than you can be, that there's going to be that theoretical point that you think you have control and you lose it. Is that relatively accurate? And do you think that there is value, that's what I was going to get at, in experiencing that breaking point so that you could rebuild yourself or reframe a sense of who you are?
I think proverbially that is accurate. I would break after the diet, you know?
Yeah.
So I would, for me, I do have a personality where the whatever I've set down on paper for the bodybuilding prep is relatively sacrosanct. I haven't gotten to I've pushed myself pretty effing hard in preps, and I've had coaches make me take like a deload or a diet break when I wouldn't have otherwise myself. But I mean, like, you know, I tell a funny story how in 2007 I had an extra tablespoon of almond butter on my diet during one day. Like, I went doop, and that was it for the day. And then I did it again, and I like hated myself, like literally in tears. Like, that was the if I get technically, I did break the diet based on how strict I made it. And like, now I wouldn't even consider it that, because I'd be like, all right, I'll have one less tablespoon tomorrow. But I didn't think that way in the first time. You know, I was like, here's the plan for today, black and white. I was off. So that was me, you know, breaking the diet. And for other people, it is much more apparent, larger magnitude. It creates an actual setback versus just a mental one. But I definitely broke my quote unquote reverse diet, or whatever game plan I have, which really wasn't that well formulated, which is part of the problem. But so I think, yeah, whether it comes out sideways and negatively affects your relationships, whether it is just you're going through the motions and you don't feel motivated, manifests in depression or whatever, I think, yeah, you take an L. When you sign up for contest prep, you take an L somewhere, period. I think that can be facilitative or debilitative.
Because what I was going to say about that, to me, being an outsider, but knowing this from other disciplines, taking the L could potentially have value, but it also serves as a potential recalibration between your own perception of yourself and reality. And what I mean is, like, so we use the wrestling example, or fighters talk about this all the time. So Mike Tyson has said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So ask any casual MMA fan, Eric, like, they'll give the armchair criticism. Oh, I wouldn't have done that. I would have done that. And they think that they're the exception, that if they somehow got in the ring, that what they would do would be different. Anyways, a lot of these individuals, when they have that reckoning, that moment, it serves as a definitive recalibration of their sense of identity, because they're going to take an L. So like, you go in for your first sparring session, you because guys, it's the worst. Like, I remember when I was, what was it, Eric, 215, 220. That's like, I looked up Arnold's stage weight, and buddy, I was at close to 30%, whatever the amount percent, I was high level of body fat. And in my head, I wasn't in quotations that far off, maybe 3 to 5 years. Like it's absurd. Looking back now, it's 18, but it's absurd in the moment. But in the same way, those individuals, ask any single person, they think they're going to be the person that could duck, that could weave, that can move, that has the rhythm, the timing. When they get hit, their constitution, because it's all about constitution when it comes to getting hit, right? Anyways, inevitably, always, if it's a sparring set, they're going to take a hard L. And it's the act of taking the L, but it's also then the reckoning between the way they see themselves. Yeah, and I was wondering about that as maybe, I would kind of put that forth, not maybe taking the L, but your perception of reality or what you're experiencing. It doesn't need to be it can never be a one-to-one to, in fact, what is happening, but it needs to be within the ballpark. Like I think your perception needs to be there.
Here's another way to say it, Omar. Let's say we have, what do you think, 50,000 listeners?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
This is a true statement for 49,999 of them. Someone in the Iron Culture audience is working harder than you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there is that one fucking outwork champion among you who that statement was untrue for, but for the rest of the nearly 50,000 of you, someone's working harder than you. And for many of those 50,000, there's a lot of people who are working harder than you, But it may also be true that all 50,000 of you are working pretty hard or working sufficiently hard. And your ability to gauge that accurately, am I working sufficiently hard or do I just think I'm working hard? It is relative to the endeavor you're trying to accomplish. And you can take someone who has been a hard worker for being a casual lifter or a serious lifter even, and then when they get into contest prep, they go, oh, Jesus, like this is requiring like an exponentially higher level of work that I thought it would.
Yeah.
And that can be something that's, I think, to your point, that is an important experience, whether you rise to the challenge or you decide that is not worth it for me. And I don't want to participate in that way in the Iron game. And I would prefer to leverage hard work in a different way, or the juice is not worth the squeeze. That was absolutely the case for me in the post-contest period. I mean, honestly, the prep itself was also hard because I was planning on doing a show in June after the show I did in May. And I knew I wouldn't make it. I was like, nah, like I'm going to change the goal. I'm going to do another show in another week. So I did 2 shows in May instead of a show in May and June because I was tapping out.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. In 07, I was someone who could have handled a hard diet for 5 months. In 09, I dieted from January to September and I pushed myself harder and got leaner. And I pushed myself too hard. Like that was, despite the fact that I had the larger bounce back in terms of body weight regain from 07, I think I'll use the term trauma again, just to piss off that psychologist who's listening. Let's all just say the stress I put myself under and the amount of like shivers I get looking back on any contest prep, 09 bar none was the hardest, And then 2011, I didn't get quite as lean, but I didn't need to. I won a show and then I just cashed out. I'm like, I'm solid, that was my goal. But the reason I cashed out earlier and didn't want to go was because I was still in like fear of having to go where I went to in 09, And then it wasn't until 2019 when I competed again and I got by far my best conditioning, best physique overall. And I pushed not as hard as 09, but got leaner and dieted for nearly as long. And I was considering going a little further, but the main reason I stopped dieting in 2019 and didn't do more shows was because I kept being in a position where what I needed to succeed at the level I wanted to was something I couldn't achieve in contest prep. Like I needed to be bigger, right? Perennial problem for Eric Helms. But I didn't see the point to continue. And it also was starting to conflict with my schedule. Like I'd already traveled and done 5 shows. I'd been to the States multiple times and it just wasn't, it was more of a pain and I couldn't see necessarily the payoff, right? So I thought, hey, better to work in the off season. So the ability to have that awareness in 2019 and then in 2009 and then 2011 did come from those recalibrations. But I do think, again, this is a bit of survivorship bias. There are some people who have that opportunity to push themselves and they go, no thanks. Like I'm not about that. And that might give them a quote unquote negative self view of, oh, I'm not as a hard worker as a bodybuilder. They're crazy. And that might be it, or it might be that you don't value the same things, or that it would not be worth it. Like there's a, like, what am I going to say? I'm not as a hard worker as a mountain climber, because I'm more risk averse. Like I don't want to work really hard to potentially die. Like I'm not going to be a solo, like a free soloist. Like it doesn't matter how good I could be, or the like, even if the percentages were in my favor that I probably wouldn't die, I'm just not that risk averse. Does that make me not? Like I don't know if that necessarily makes me a less hard worker than someone like that. So I think it is I think framing is very important. But I do think there are certain framings that where you're thrown that adversity and you take the L, you might not come back from it, and that could be overall harmful. So I in an ideal world, and we don't necessarily have control over this, you get thrown progressively larger challenges over time, so that by the time you get to that big nasty L that's just gonna stomp you into the dust, you can come back from it. But unfortunately, sometimes life gives you those on day 2, and I can't guarantee that's not a bad thing.
No, that is, Eric, I think that is by far the most accurate description. And I think those of us, the survivorship bias, those of us that have made it, we're trying to make the path for anyone that comes after us just a little bit easier. Some of the nuggets, like we joke about those, like golden nuggets, the tidbits that may or may not be of assistance, because let's talk about that cumulative robustness that you built up over time. So framing it this way, in 2019, you were in your best shape of your career. Bar none, like in my personal opinion, like you looked fantastic. I think it's an iconic pose, the pose where you're emulating Frank Zane, where you looked like I think just objectively stellar, right? But as you would say, that prep in terms of difficulty, despite being in your best shape, wasn't your most difficult prep. The entire time that you've been training, and I think maybe this is one of the, how do you say, missed opportunities by some lifters, and we can get into that.
Can I say one thing, Omar?
Go.
I also don't know that isn't a biased perspective. Like if you could transport my brain into my body from 08 or 07 or something like that, maybe I'd be like, oh my God, I'm dying, you know? I don't know. But nonetheless, something about it now, or something about me, certainly made it feel not too bad.
100%, 100%. Like, so Eric potentially has like mentally leveled up in terms of your ability to withstand things that before would have been a problem for you. You've been experienced enough. I do think a lot, and I want your commentary on this, man, is habituation to certain experiences. So I'm so, like, folks, I'm sorry for bringing up so many MMA, but it's just like I lift. I watch that. I'm actually in the garage, probably gonna get a TV. Not to watch like lame shit while I'm lifting, but things that are conducive, to be honest, to lifting. So maybe some fighting, some lifting, some like weightlifters lifting. But anyways,
Three's Company reruns.
yeah. Golden Girls, come on. But what I was gonna say is, so everyone, Eric, a BJJ expert, so Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu experts, they not only will not tap when they're put in precarious positions on armbar, but they've been habituated to the pain sensation where they more or less know their body, and actually so much to the point that real legends that have done it for over a decade, sometimes in a real fight, so like let's say they're competing, they're put in positions that the pain signal, so for you or myself, we're put in it, we're tapping immediately because it feels like it's about to break. That sensation has both been dulled so much, but also they're so resilient that that break occurs, and they're not, and it's not just the shock, it's not the adrenaline, but they've been put in that position so many times that the fear isn't present, the pain that would be present for you and myself is not there. But in that same way, the habituation, I do think there is this interest in like this joy in repetition potentially, that you've been in that pocket, like where you said it's man, that's getting real. But like 2009, where you had to go, like where you got grizzled, it's like you proved to yourself a certain level. It's like, okay, so I know I can handle this. I know also that I have, 2009 and 2019, 10 more years of experience, that entire process for you, whether it was intentional or not, and that's what I was getting at, you've leveled up your base skills. And I'm not talking about, and that's why people think they're like the hard skills. So like counting, like Eric is savvy or somehow in 2019 versus 2009, like you're savvy or counting math. That's not the definable skill that we're talking about here. It's everything that's unspoken that combines to make you a lifter or a person.
Yeah, you know, that arm bar kind of example you were giving actually reminded me, man, this we're going back 14 years now, I think, or 15 or maybe 10, but Alberto was trying to help out not one of our clients or one of his clients, but a fellow competitor.
Yep.
Who was just like we saw him between multiple shows, and each time he just wasn't lean enough. And Alberto was getting better, so they trained at the same gym. And he's asked him like, "Hey, how are you improving your conditioning?" And he was telling him what he's doing with his diet, and then he's like, "All right, cool." And then they were doing their thing together, and Alberto observed him eating more than was planned, like on game day. Like he was trying to help him with his peak week. Like, here's the carb load, and he was exceeding it. And he was like, "Well, why are you doing that?" He goes, "I'm hungry." And Alberto was just like, "So?" Like I don't get, you know. So it was clear that I think a lot of these physical signals that we get, to use a colloquial term, that fight or flight signal, your initial thoughts, like if you just kind of go with it, is if I don't do this, I'm going to die, or there's going to be permanent damage or injury. You know, I have to do something about this. When you first diet down for a show and you get to a point when you're that hungry, that is what it feels like. You have this level of hunger that you can't stop thinking about, and it seems wrong. I'm so lethargic. There's something wrong with me. And I think for anyone who has thought they've been injured or has been seriously injured, there's that sense in your gut, like, oh shit, this is damage. Like this is an existential threat. And you get those even when it's not an existential threat. Like you said, like sometimes these guys break their arms when they don't realize that they would have. But how many hundreds of times did they not break their arms when someone who was less experienced would have thought that they were? Yep. So I think a big part of bodybuilding specifically is acceptance, but you can only get that acceptance when you know that you've been on the other side and you lived, you were fine. It wasn't a big deal. Because it's not just the sensation of hunger or the sensation of lethargy. It's knowing that is normal, and that it is not anything more than it is. Like you're not attaching a narrative or a story or an emotional response to that same signal that you're getting from your body that you used to, which is basically exactly what you're describing with being put in those precarious positions where it's threatening a break, and you're you know, pain only to that athlete means I'm in pain. It doesn't mean my arm's going to break, I need to tap out immediately. Just like feeling like getting up off the toilet and walking across the room is just as hard as an entire workout, and constantly being focused on food doesn't mean anything beyond that being the case. So you take a deep breath, you get off the toilet, you walk across the room, and when you eat your next meal, you're enjoying it too much and you kind of just let it go, and it doesn't mean anything beyond that's the way you feel. So it still sucks because you're still feeling it. Like these athletes are not being like, you know what I want to do on Tuesday? Put me in an arm bar that nearly breaks my arm, you know? Just like I don't contest prep like for fun every year, you know? But it doesn't feel like an existential threat, and I don't have that emotional response or that irrational fear, because I only know now that it was an irrational fear. Back then, I didn't know it was an irrational fear. So you're right. I do think what we try to do is lower, hopefully what we try to do is lower the ladder down to people. And what you do as a coach is you normalize their experience. You share yours. It's not the same, and never will be, as them doing it their second season, but it can go a long way towards extending what they can take, what they're willing to incur, and what scares the shit out of them. You know, like it's kind of like you know, sometimes you'll have dogs or cats who respond to firecrackers, and it scares the shit out of them on the 4th of July, like in the States, or Guy Fawkes Day in other parts of the world. Some animals, if they're very perceptive, they'll look to their owner and they'll be like, "Are you scared?" You know, and just simply being calm around your animal when they're scared can help them out. Not always. Sometimes certain dog owners and cat owners, like, yeah, it doesn't make a difference. They lose their mind. But I have actually seen like, yeah, it's okay. You know, not like reacting to them reacting, and then it just becomes a steamroll effect. But anyway, I think just like, or the classic one, I don't know if anyone has grown up in a relatively inner city school like I did. When people started running, you just start running with them because there's a fight. Let's go watch it. And one thing we used to do for fun was we would just start running to see if we could get everyone to start running. And when we were in like middle school and there was no fight, and everyone's like, "What happened?" I'm like, "I don't know, man." So yeah, or you'll hear people who, like, you know, if they live in a city where there has been war or riots or things like that, you do it not because you're trying to go see the fight, but you're like, you know, better safe than sorry. Let's get out of here, you know. So I've seen some stand-up comedians talk about that, and I somewhat relate to it. But I think those examples of just being able as a coach to give information because you've walked that path and you've had other athletes do it, to normalize it, and to also help them identify, okay, no, this is something we need to pay attention to. You know, this is not just an ache and pain, or wow, you're really too beat up. Like, this is negatively affecting your life. Like, you're having GI distress, you're having ankle edema. Like, hold up, let's take a diet break, that type of thing. So yeah, you can let someone borrow your experience to some degree. It doesn't fully replace, you know, having that firsthand knowledge, but I think it is a very important thing. And I think that it can be the difference between someone getting into good versus great shape in their first season, or getting into good shape but being like super beat up from it, versus getting in great shape and feeling pretty beat up from it, you know, in the same way. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for helping people understand through sharing your experiences.
Eric, I'm going to share a personal story that you're going to find amusing, and then I'm going to launch off of what you just said, because you're talking about everyone running the fight. So this is a true story, and I think you react just like how I reacted because of our shared experiences, and that is inside of a large mall, as an example. Like, this is years ago. Anyways, all of a sudden, a loud alarm goes off, and everyone's kind of like looking to one another. No one's really moving. Because they just assume that it's a false alarm. Like, why would this go off? No one else is moving. Myself and one other person, I'm immediately going for the escalator, because it doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter to me, the fact that it is 99.9% a false alarm. We have incomplete knowledge of the situation. Relying upon what other people are doing in that present moment is completely useless. So what I'm going to do, and this one other, like, Eric, there's literally like maybe like 500 people like in the vicinity. They're all looking for confirmation. They're deferring to someone else. I don't care. Like, 1 in 100,000 chance. 1 in 100,000 chance it's actually something. I'm already gone, so I'm good. What is the opportunity cost of me leaving? Nothing. I walk my ass back in 10 minutes later. You know what I mean? But I just, to me, as an example, like, let's say, like,
I'm embarrassed to say I've been in the opposite situation. So the AUT Millennium, I'm serious. So AUT Millennium, where I do a lot of my research. When I was a PhD student, and I was there literally 6-7 days a week.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it was in like the 2012, 2014 time period, but our fire alarm went off all the time. And after maybe the third time, I would just put headphones in. I'm not even moving out of my desk. I'm like, because the whole place has to go outside, line up. And then by the time you actually finish lining up, you're going back inside. And I'm like, I'm waiting until I smell smoke, bro.
No, but
probably not what I'd recommend to the listener, but yeah.
To be fair to you, see, so that was an unusual event.
Informed choice. It was an informed choice, yes.
Yeah, it's like you're like, all right, this has already happened like 4 or 5 times. Like, it's going to keep happening. I get it. It's like the boy who cried wolf. This was an outlier.
You know, if I ever don't show up for a podcast episode, it's because I died in a fire.
Knock on wood. They're going to play this. You know, Eric, this is tragic, and this is because capitalism rules.
In fact, I'll say this. Please do play this clip at my funeral, just so everyone can have a good laugh. You know, you celebrate who I was in life and the errors you made.
Bro, that is the darkest of humor. I will say this. So unfortunately, I'm gonna make Brandon remove this audio, because now I'm gonna go there and get super morbid. But because capitalism rules everything around us, the insurance agent that's trying to go over would say to your wife, "No, Eric, it showed willful ignorance of the situation." You know what I mean? I'm like, nah, that wasn't the case at all. Okay, so like, wow. Make sure the life insurance claim works. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. No, but to get back to the topic, loved everything you said, man. We keep coming around this concept of both framing and then calibration that I do think is super important. I want to give a little bit of a personal example here, and that is, I also want to give a shout out, Eric. So I want to give a shout out. He's probably listening to this episode. Derek Liu. The reason why I'm shouting out my man Derek. So Derek, I believe he became a physical therapist over the last several years. I remember he used to train at Fortis. This is a stud of a lifter. He actually afterwards. So I saw him compete recently. The spoiler is that after 4 or 5 years, he was dealing with some issues, some serious back issues. He was a top level Canadian national lifter in his weight class, in one of the lighter weight classes. He trained at Fortis. I love the way that he trained. You could just tell when someone's focused, just the way they approach their lifts, the tops, like everything. Anyways, so he had some serious setbacks, and we love us a good comeback story. And so anyways, 4 years later, he literally went to school to study at that. I think maybe he got his master's and then he went into physical therapy. So his 4 or 5 year journey, that's what it's been. It's now culminated in this comeback meet that he's done, which I think is just a testament. So one, I just want to give a personal respect to the dude, because he did say, I will say he does listen on occasion. He said Iron Culture, and also Mike to share. Shout out to Mike T. But just someone doing the damn thing. And so now we're talking about some of those, like the rarefied, those athletes that overcome. But one of the things when I was talking to him, and then ways led on to ways for myself, Eric, I think I told you this, that recently, for a wide variety of different reasons, I had one of my most successful training years in like 2021, like when the pandemic was kind of raging on, because I could just really like zero in, simplify my life, and training was a large part of it. And then what happened is I had an acute injury to my elbow that actually so it prevented me really from deadlifting, from doing the overhead press, the bench press, anything of note. So anyways, that was in early September. It's only now, basically the last like 2 months-ish, that I'm
a year later.
So yeah, like a year later, and strength is it is one of the ways that I define myself, and it was a little bit of a tough pill to swallow, considering that I was arguably like upper body strength, overhead press I was focusing on. I was getting a lot of good returns. Like I was in that momentous kind of cycle of like training, hitting a PR, building it back down, body was recovering, so everything was moving as it should. Cool, whatever. And anyways, the long story short is that over the last few months, because now I'm essentially, my baseline strength is the weakest it's been in years upon years, and that's okay. It happens. It's a temporary thing. Like we're building back, but that even the comeback has been a little stickier than it normally would be. Oh, you need like a 4 to 6 week recharge. You get back to 80% baseline, then you build from there. Like whatever. Like we've all done this a ton of times. Like my first, I'd say, like acute injury or setback was like really like 2015. Like you learn a lot about yourself. So anyways, that's all good. This time's interesting because I would say it's definitely stickier in ways, and there's multiple reasons than before. My mindset, my outlook overall, very solid because I've been in this position. But one of the things I was going to talk about quickly, Eric, is that I like to calibrate in my life. Like just as soon as, like I said, the fair we were talking about it, so much so to the point I said to you before, my man, that I do like to train usually on my own, or I train with my brother, is that I've enlisted. And so now I'll be training at least one time a week with someone who's a very serious, very competitive lifter. So a friend of myself, just because we talk about these terms, these phrases, like was that a 9, or like what's going on here, and just to be in the same environment. You may think it's one thing to conceptually understand something, it's another thing, the experiential, to go through it. And you might think, once again, and we spoke about that, either training at home or whatnot, you're in your own little silo, you're like, yeah, I am training hard. To be there present in the moment and viscerally, there's all these subtle cues that are hard to even, verbalize as you're witnessing them take place. But you kind of, as you inhabit that space, you see it, you observe it. I want to make sure, basically, because I'm ready to make progress, that not only like this, I hate that all-encompassing hard work, but it's just like, oh, okay, like this is what training looks like. This is what elite level training. Oh, I've been around this before, and holding yourself to a standard. I think as humans, just in general, and they've shown this, like, man, there's so many examples when it comes to music or whatever, like calibration. So like your tone, your pitch, that you think you're hitting a note, oh, you hit actually a key here, you're off, you're actually a quarter tone off. Our perceptions of ourselves. So I think I get back to calibration. But then the other thing I wanted to launch off of, and I want to get your insight, this has been kind of spreading around in the space for a little bit, because I think there was like a viral video, and it takes many different forms, but I think it was an Olympic athlete, and man, I'm gonna butcher what the actual phrase is. I'm gonna call it like not the rule of thirds, but Eric, I'm sure like you already know this. It reminds me of like the Sith, the rule of two, like there can only be two at any one time. But basically, the way that she described it, and any experienced lifter understands this when we talk about volatility, but I want you to comment on this. She said she was having a rough go, and anyways, her perception of how her training should go and how it actually was going in order to make progress was off. Her coach explained it essentially as such. About a third of your workouts are going to go as you expect. They're going to go well. You're going to feel pretty good. About a third are going to go like okay, like whatever, it's fine. And about a third are going to be not good. And that if you're actually making progress or if you're doing what you should, that's about the right ratio. But I think one of the things I wanted to talk to you about quickly, just and that's what people talk about, like no bad days or whatever. It's like, oh, how you frame it. Like it's totally true. It's just the inevitable process of divesting yourself from like that immediate temporal experience where your direct, like how you feel is directly tethered to that session, or then you keep expanding the time course from session to week to month to now, for myself, for example, like this is several months, right? And I know inevitably, because I'm stacking the chips in my favor, eventually I'll cash in and I'll win. But like that being one of the skills, I think potentially could be like a solidified constant usually in a lot of people.
Absolutely. And I think lifting weights has a built-in emphasis on delayed gratification through just that process in and of itself. As a novice lifter, the aggregate experience is scaled to the time course of how quickly you can make progress, and that is still true for an intermediate and advanced lifter. It's just that you have to put in, like you said, weeks and months when you're an intermediate and months and years as an advanced lifter to see that. So you don't get too caught up on a single day. But interestingly enough, that reality creates problems at different scales. Like it's easy to have a bunch of days be just meh as an advanced lifter and kind of feel like you're in a rut and like you haven't missed any workouts, so the average person just wouldn't really relate to it. But you're not bringing the kind of focus and you're not getting that reward sense from individual sessions. So you're kind of in this it's not even thirds anymore. It's like 4/5 are just B+ work or B- workouts, kind of thing.
Yep.
And, for me, I was in a rut like that recently. I came out of the rut recently, and it was due to some of the environmental factors that we talked about on our episode where we discussed training environments. Mm-hmm. Is when training at home, there are so many conveniences that you can get yourself into a place where you don't treat training as sacrosanct as you used to do. Mm-hmm. So I was training after I finished all my work, like at 5 p.m., and then you're tired. You just want to get through it before, because dinner's coming up. It's been a long day. I've been sitting on my ass the whole time. It's dark outside. I don't have to put on socks if I don't want to, like that type of thing. So what we started to do was like, hey, let's train in the afternoon as soon as we get a break after lunch. And then we can still get back to work. We can kind of ride a high after the workout. We don't feel time pressure. And let's put on music each time we go downstairs to train. And let's put on workout clothes. And literally, those small changes created a much better training environment for Barb and I. And both of us just kind of were able to climb out of that rut because there was no easy identifiable factor, but it was just a whole lot of workouts you aren't excited about, even though you like training. It's just kind of meh, So I think that's probably a little piece of wisdom for anyone who's kind of in an unidentifiable, like direct cause rut is, well, like you might just need one finger on the scale to get things tilted in your favor, and then from the momentum to take hold. And that will probably even be more specifically relevant to people who train at home. So yeah, I know 100%, man.
Eric, real quick, I just want to say to your wife, I make this vow on air that, knock on wood, Eric ain't going out like a punk. But on that, like where he put on his headphones, we're getting that insurance claim. Just FYI, I want to double down on that because they're gonna come back. So wow, like we're just we're getting real personal in these episodes. But this, so that's why I am coming back to YouTube. It's happening, but I had the tree. It fell. I had a tree fall on my garage, Eric, and I show you the photos and like how it so it, like busted through the garage. Cool, no problem. But just speaking about insurance, this is why I've gotten very distrustful of them. Is that they claim this is a true story, okay, and that's why I gave that example. They claimed a tree. So my neighbor's tree, folks, fell on my garage. All good. It punctured because it's what like the trunk itself is several thousand pounds. Punctured a hole in the roof of my garage. Anyways, it happened just during a storm. Cool. My insurance company claimed that it was punctured, my roof, and thus they weren't going to validate, they weren't going to compensate me for the cost because the tiles, the roofing tiles, which I had several roofers take a look at, were old, which doesn't make a lick of sense. Like, one, they weren't, like, everyone said, like, they could be whatever, but their independent analyst said the reason why 20,000 pounds of pressure punctured right through my flat roof, and it's just like it's spirit, like it when I say it's spirited, Eric, it's not like, oh, it punctured it a little bit, like
I saw the picture.
Yeah. So anyways, it's like because your tiles needed to be replaced. I was like, dog, I'm gonna be honest with you. If you put 20,000 pounds of pressure on any roof, I'm pretty sure it's gonna fold. But okay. Anyways, all that to say that the insurance claims, knock on wood, we're making it happen. I do want to say, Eric, very quickly.
It's only an insurance company would be like, you know what? We only exist for that crazy time a tree falls on your house, and we're making a profit net because most of the time trees don't fall on your house.
Nah.
Oh, wait, a tree fell on your house? No, that's your fault.
Yeah. Nah, man, you really should have. Yeah. You took possession a week ago of the house. A dog, you should have replaced it. I was like, come on, man. Anyways, getting back to the topic, I do think there's just a few things to say in closing, like different examples where we said the personal journey. I do believe, like the ritual, what we said, it's the things consciously you do, but also like you adapt to an environment. And I do think this is one of the wonderful things about being a human. I think if you give someone the opportunity, they can rise to the occasion that you might set yourself up. And I use that example so often, man, of like Fortis, consciously before whatever place you're in, like you're at a mom and pop gym, it doesn't matter. You might think you're training, like legitimately, it might be an RP9 at you, and you might think you're doing everything. But as you just said, and I gotta like co-sign that immensely, that it's the unknown things that when you're in that new place that you just suddenly adapt. You're not even thinking about it. Your perceived conscious effort is the same, but the actual outcome is different because, like you said, Eric, now you're not training at 5 o'clock. Your back isn't as achy. You feel more alert. You feel more ready. You feel more willing. Your willingness and alertness for the session higher than it was before. Wow. So all these things coming together. So I think it's, as we said, stacking the chips up in your favor to consistently be in your favor, having a good frame of reference of like what is actually going on. So you're not just like, oh my God, like, you know, a chicken with their head cut off, like the world's coming to an end. Calibrating yourself by understanding, okay, what is it going to take? Where have I been? What does this actually look like, this journey? I'd put it this way, Eric, I think like 8 years ago or something, if I had the setback that I had and the time course had been the time course, I think I would have been far more disenfranchised because I had never experienced a setback before. I hadn't been physically injured before. So I wouldn't, the unknown was a big example. And I think that is one of the roles, man, of a good coach or just people. It's like, you're going to be okay. Like, let's be honest. It kind of like, I love that armbar analogy, man. I've been put in like a few different like submission positions. They feel terrible. Like you got to adapt to them because guess what? The fight or flight, like you're losing consciousness. I don't care. You have to be honestly like a sociopath. Your first time getting choked, just be like, yeah, man. Like, well, like you got me in a, just go for it or whatever. Like it doesn't, you feel your life fleeing from you, right? So it's like, it's something that you have to habituate yourself to, I think.
For sure. And yeah, I think people really shouldn't underestimate the power of modifying your environment. I mean, just think about it. Someone who regularly walks to the grocery store every day and it's snowing outside, probably going to drive. Right? You know, like assuming they have snow tires, but like, so yeah, just imagine if you could guarantee that the walking to that there'd never be snow on the ground for when you had to walk to the grocery store, you'd walk to the grocery store more often. That easy, you know? So yeah, don't underestimate the value of the environment, and then proactively think about how you can modify it. And then you can give yourself that opportunity to experience adversity and build self-efficacy, so that you can take the big L coming your way and actually come out on the other side of it, and be the person who gets put in a submission hold and doesn't tap.
Love it, love it. And Eric, we'll have a whole maybe other episode another time about the what do you do when you fail, and that's it. Like, I'm joking when I say like the tap out is occurring, like the life tap out, because one of the things like baked in obviously iron cultures that we're lifelong lifters here, and that's why we do talk about framing often. That like the conversation that's always interesting to me is one of elite athletes where you're at a certain level that everything has gone right. So let's say like a sprinter, and I'll leave it here because that's a whole other big conversation. You'll reach your peak at a certain point, and it's going to happen relatively early in your career by the time like you're 30, and then it is, in quotation, unless you haven't maximized your performance, it's all downhill from there. And it's like, well, what does that look like? Well, then the only reason why obviously you're sprinting was like to win world championships or whatnot, like what is that going to look like? I think what's great about lifting is that there's so many different pathways. There's so many ways that you could derive personal fulfillment, enjoyment, all those things, that it really is kind of like a playground with which to define yourself. And to me, like that part of the reason why obviously I keep coming back and I get so much satisfaction from it is that journey has shifted for me over time, and I would argue obviously for the better.
Yeah, it's finding a way to grow with it, even if you're not necessarily growing in the way you expected. And yeah, what does Jeff call it? The apology hour for losing gains or whatever.
Oh, the
coping hour.
Yeah, the number one cope podcast is what he says. Who knew being emotionally intelligent was the same thing as coping? You know, it's like understanding someone, seeing people from the other side. I do like what I love, Eric, what you're able to do, because you are in academia and people, I think there's that negative assumption that it's like either or. And I brought up, remember we had that dude on, we were talking about calisthenics, and he was hyped because I brought up Fritz Long Metropolis, where I said about the head and the heart's like the two things. So it's like, you obviously the research, but then being a coach, like the personal experience, that it's not this like one-to-one of, oh, here's a simple solution, like this is what you need to do, you need to pull yourself up by the bootstraps. I think really understanding other people, or being able to put ourselves outside of our own experiences, is incredibly powerful. And that is why, coming back actually to what we said at the beginning, Eric, it's iron culture for all lifters. And so we are covering that topic. It's not just like, oh, you're winning all the time, oh, that's fantastic, oh, like props to you, guess what, and we're not giving those a tiny convenient things that people want to hear, right? Like that really are lies where it's like, oh, you're always going to make progress, like it's like this road, like don't, Eric, oh, you guys had, just will it, bro. Just will it. Just like overcome it. It's no big deal, you know?
It's the secret. Yeah.
That's the secret. Eric, my man, anything you want to say in closing?
No, I just want to thank people for joining us on our Instagram Reacts Coping Power Hour.
Yeah.
That's become the new thrust of the podcast, and we hope you're enjoying it.
It's a bold new direction. We would say by choice, others would say by necessity. It's one of those things, chicken or the egg, necessity being the mother of invention, that we're adapting to the times. You'll probably notice it that new episodes will be just TikTok reacts. So it'll be whatever the popular trend is, Eric, then we'll name that episode whatever it is. So it's like, the something dance, something we react, featuring, and then like kind of the cover image will just be just the absolute most disgusting, like a combination of anything that we think could lead to virality,
I see it as only a winning strategy for us, to be honest, because then we don't have to come up with titles. They're dictated. We just get to allow the winds of social media to blow us into new episodes. And if you're not excited about that as a listener, I don't know what will excite you. So that's all I have to say.
Eric, a side note, my man, and then I'll wrap it up. One of the things that I couldn't help reflect on, they've shown this like kind of through social media and whatnot, that it provides this how do you say it? Like this funnel for humans to experience things, but your reactions to the social media environment become predictable. They're predictive, and as a result, they know what you think, they know what you're feeling, and they know likely how you are to react. That even the creation process, which theoretically should be something that everyone, you have your own canvas, you could palette, you could paint whatever you want. And now the new forms, it's like prefabricated, done for you, which is sad because part of social media is self-expression. And on things like TikTok, you're following a trend. So it's done. If you want to be popular, you have to do whatever.
The female robot voice providing the audio caption to everything.
Tough.
There's no reason everyone would need to do that, but here we are.
Tough.
And that who is going to be our third co-host on all of our future episodes, it's going to be Omar, myself, and then just a female robot voice caption that chimes in every now and again, because that's just what our creative juices independently have led us towards.
Thank you. Yeah. Hey, Eric, for us, unfortunately, we'll be saying so many things that'll be contrary to like what they want us to. It'll just say like something redacted. Like it'll just be her voice like over our voices, and we learned what redactions do in this episode.
They won't be effective.
They won't be effective. Well, my friend, I will say thank you for joining us on another episode of Iron Culture. You can go ahead, we already said, leave a rating and review. Typically, people leave 5 stars. We did hear about a 1-star and a 3-star review, so we do know it is indeed possible. It's unlikely, though, if you look statistically. Nonetheless, go ahead, leave a rating and review, and we'll catch you every single Monday from now until the end of time.